And good morning. Many thanks for watching KTN News. My name is Dennis Aseto. In studio with me, we will be having a discussion on matters to do with economy. Where are we as a country? The president recently addressed the nation with regard to matters to do with economy and says that he has managed to stabilize the economy. But where are we? What is the situation from the eyes of experts? We will be having this discussion in the next 1 hour to just make sense of the president's speech, the situation of the country's economy. And in studio with me is Leonard Wanyama on my extreme left. He is Regional Coordinator, East Africa Tax and Governance Network. Karibu sana. And on my immediate left, that is Dr. Sheikh Salat, tax consultant and social justice activist, as we just dissect through the country's economy. Where are we? What should we expect in the year 2024? Gentlemen, karibuni sana. And I'll start with you, Wanyama. The president said a lot with regard to the economy. We know that Eurobond is about to mature. We know the debt ceiling that has been, we've gone beyond the debt ceiling according to the laws of the land. In terms of Kenya's economy, where are we?
I think I'd describe it as a tightrope, walking a tightrope. That's the situation we are in. As you've described, we have Eurobond to pay. We have other debts, domestic debt. We also have service delivery to achieve. And so looking at our revenues at this point in time, I think it's a very difficult balancing act, especially in the context, again, of the cost of living. So there's no better way than describing it as a tightrope, because you'll be walking a long distance, just balancing out which payments to make, which ones to sacrifice as you go through the next year and the year after.
And I come to you, Dr. Now, when the president says that he's managed to stabilize the economy, are Kenyans feeling that in their pockets?
I think it depends on who you're talking about, because if you're talking about some Kenyans are feeling it. But I think the majority of Kenyans are not. You have realized that if you even go to town these days, the town seems to be emptier than usual. Meaning people have stopped using their cars, people are cutting down on expenditures that are unnecessary. And even the government has failed to that, because the collections they were expecting from the fuel industry has actually gone down. So if you look at it, Kenyans are feeling the pinch. Prices have gone up, inflation is very high. The shilling now has depreciated up to 150 plus, I think 152 was the last time I checked. So people are suffering, but not all people are suffering. Because if you go to Mombasa, now the hotels are fully booked, SGR is fully booked. I was looking at bookings of airlines, fully booked. So in other words, there are some Kenyans who are having fun, but 99.9% of the rest of Kenyans are actually suffering.
And now, Wanyama, when the president says that he's managed to stabilize the economy, let's talk about stabilizing the economy for a second, yeah? What will it take for Kenyans to start feeling that stability in their pockets? Because what the president says, giving us hope that he stabilized the economy. But at what point will a Kenyan paint a picture of a normal Kenyan, our Mamboga, start saying, finally, there is relief in my pocket, I'm able to afford ABCD? At what point, what needs to change for us to start saying that?
So you have to realize that it's a question of difference of perspectives in terms of the financial question that you're putting. So for instance, while the government said it was going to expand the tax base, a lot of what it's done is to expand the tax rate so that it could increase revenue. Its efforts to increase the tax base, for instance, the housing levy and so forth, are obviously in court and are being contested, but they are still very painful, because the impact directly is on the tax rate and how it deals specifically with the individual's cash flow and savings and so forth. So the shilling is being milked dry in someone's pocket, and therefore the question which we deal with annually, for instance, in various processes, is how do we negotiate tax base versus tax rate. So in the coming year, again, there'll be discussions over the finance bill and the finance act that will be for next year for financing the budget again. It will be a question of what tax rates are they going to change? But then looking at the overall economic situation, I think we are in for about another 2 years of this because of our debt demands and a lot of the obligations we have to satisfy. And so we are in for quite a bit of time for this because we have a lot of debt to pay. The question being, for instance, when the president speaks of stability, I think it's more a question of viability of the state, the fact that it can still run and carry out its functions almost normal, although more pressure and tax burden to the citizen. However, to the Mwananchi, you see it's a direct question to them. And so those two perspectives then clash, and they have to be negotiated or gone through the legislative processes for us to get to exactly where Mwananchi will get some relief.
Daktari, let's talk about the issue to do with taxes. The president says he had to make very difficult decisions and painful decisions for the economy to be able to stabilize. But can we tax the citizens? Can we tax the Kenyan out of the country's debt? Does it make sense?
No, it doesn't, because if you look at the collections versus the payment of debt, we collected about 2.56 trillion and then paid in debt 1.65 trillion, meaning what remained is only about 1 trillion for us to actually spend on everything. So we cannot do that because as you tax more, there is this curve called the Lafort curve, which means the more you tax, the less you get actually. Because it reaches a point where further taxation becomes, not sustainable. So I don't think whether he can tax us to a point where we can pay the debt. So, and the debt itself is not sustainable in the long run, because what he's actually done is the idea of just kicking the can down the road. So you just kick it, it goes a bit further, and you have to kick it. That's what he's doing. So in the end, he has to actually make the hard decisions. Among the hard decisions he has to make is you have to balance taxation with resource utilization. How you use that taxation money. You have actually raised the resources. How do you use them? You have to have some sort of austerity measures on government expenditure. You have to reduce how you use this money. You have to use it, optimally. We cannot have people going to Harambes with bags of cash and then telling us the economy is doing bad. That doesn't show us, exactly what is happening. So Kenyans know the fact that they are suffering, but they are not seeing the same suffering in their leaders. So we need to see, yes, taxes are okay. Every country, every citizen has to pay tax. That's a normal thing. Everywhere in the world will pay taxes. But then the issue is not about taxation. The issue is about how we use the tax resource that we have collected. We have to reduce the amount of corruption we have. We were telling us 40% of the amounts we collected is being stolen, 2 billion a day. Then you're not motivating me to actually pay tax. So I think he cannot tell us by increasing the taxes. And Leonard has said that he has increased the tax rate, not the tax base. You can actually reduce the tax rate and increase the number of people who are actually paying taxes. That's not what they have done. What they have done is, for people who are actually earning employment income, taxation now runs up to 54% of your pay slip. People think it's 30%, they look at the graduated scale and think, okay, it is about 30%. It's not. It's about 54% of what you earn goes to government. So what remains is 46% for you. So I think the taxation, the increase in taxation is not sustainable. So in the new budget, they have to rethink the way they will be raising these funds. And I don't think taxation will be the way to do it.
And Wanyama, World Bank and IMF have given stats that our tax and our debt rather is sustainable. But locally, even according to numbers that we have on how much we've borrowed as compared to our tax ceiling, shows that it is not sustainable. So why is it that we have these two global bodies telling us that it is sustainable, yet when we just sit back and even feel it in our own pockets, it doesn't seem to be making sense to us? Where is the confusion in what these international bodies are telling us?
So I think how you need to understand this is that it's like a situation where you're being explained to that the way out of your current debt is new debt. So that's where mainly the confusion is happening. And when we talk of debt restructuring, it's mainly, for instance, spreading maybe the years in which you're going to pay and so forth. This is because the debt we took initially was commercial debt, which is you pay in a shorter term, but at a higher interest rate. And this is what has done us in. Now, what is happening is that we are getting debt from these two institutions to restructure. We'll pay over a longer period, but then that means we will just then be doing the balancing act as we go along. So, for instance, the money that has come in mainly is to just keep the country running on a very general level, but it is not going to reflect in your pocket per se. So it's to get us through that period, restructure the debt, finish, for instance, the Eurobond, which is now really painful on us, and then we move on into the next phase where now you have to think of actions that will bring at least more relief, more prosperity, open up the economy and so forth. So that's why, for instance, projections that say that we are in this for a 3 or 2 year run, the space in which we are thinking in these painful times. But essentially, when they are saying that about that, they mean that that pathway is now at least clear with the debt that is now being provided. Yes.
And I come to you, Dr. Now, key issues that you've both alluded to is the fact that there is the increased tax base and tax rate. Now, here's a question where even we talk about the housing levy, it is now in court. And the court says it is unfair for those who are employed for them to be taxed and those who are not to be taxed. And it is now a question of trying to find a means of legalizing these through the National Assembly. But that aside, as the president keeps finding ways of increasing revenue that he gets from his citizens, moving forward, and even next year, we expect that the tax, what you want to collect would be more, which would then mean either increase of tax base or tax rate. What should the president do moving forward, and all his advisors, the economists that advise him, to make it easier for Kenyans to want to contribute to the national kitty?
Very simple. I think for us to be able to be, enthusiastic about paying taxes, we have to see a service delivery. Yeah, you can't tell me I pay more tax for the same level of delivery, which many people say is nothing. There's no delivery going on. So they have to actually, have quality service delivery. Then Kenyans will be saying, okay, if the education is being funded, if roads are paved, if electricity is regular and available, if most of the services that Kenyan citizens actually expect is being delivered, paying tax will not be a problem. The other issue is, if I was just telling you, 99% of Kenyans are suffering, but 1% is having fun in Mombasa for these public the holidays. So long as we are seeing that the people who, public officers and senior civil servants are having fun, and the rest of the population is suffering, then that disparity creates a situation where citizens might not even want to pay tax, may not be interested to pay. You can take it from me by issuing assessments and bringing young people who you have trained in the military, to come and knock at my door, but then I will not be enthusiastic to pay you. So how do you make the citizens want to pay tax? You provide services. And then, it's not about increasing revenue. I think Kenyans are stretched to a point where there will be no more revenue you can squeeze out of them. What you should do is use that revenue optimally. You cannot tell me 40% is stolen. The leakage is so high that the president himself said 2 billion is being lost a day, as I said before. So long as that is happening, then why are we increasing the revenue? In fact, somebody said Kenya has too much money. That's why there's too much to steal. If there was no money, what's being stolen? So there's a lot of money, but it's being stolen. So they have to curb corruption. They have to reduce the expenditure of government, especially unnecessary expenditure, unnecessary trips, per diems for senior people. All these things have to. I'm telling you, in some cases, the amount of money they spend on just flowers and tea can actually fund a few schools and a few universities. So there has to be some sort of austerity to balance whatever they are trying to do to increase the tax revenue. Yeah.
And Leonard, now Dr. has painted a picture of we need to seal all the loopholes that do exist in managing all of the current existing funds. And a Kenyan out there would ask if KRA is, according to their own estimates, they collect, say, 2 trillion shillings. Why can't we just budget ourselves with the 2 trillion shillings that we have?
So you have to realize that the problem is that we have serious fiscal indiscipline. And you have to look at it in the cycle of public finance management. At the collection level, allocation, expenditure, and then at the point of sanctions. So for instance, you have unfair revenue collection. You have unfair revenue allocation. At the expenditure side, it's unfair. Then at the point of mismanagement, the sanctions, again, it's very shifty. So that is the problem. How do we sort the question of fiscal indiscipline in our public finance system? So it's definitely disappointing, and if I allude to what you said, because Kenyans are willing to pay their taxes. If you ask one question and say, why do you pay your taxes? 9 out of 10 people will say, we pay because we want services. And then if you ask the second question, why do you not pay your taxes, right? Only 22% say something like, because we'll get caught, something like that. So people want services. Some of the other issues, even when you do the research, really don't matter to them. And you have to understand, when you think of the fiscal indiscipline, there is not only just the corruption aspect, but there's also the politics around what we think of our public finances, because the problem is at 3 levels. There's the theft, which is talking about, which is saying is at 2 billion a day, as it has been said. But that's only 5% of the problem. When you add on wastage, then you add on the loopholes, which are now the technical matters, things like tax expenditures and so forth. Because those is at a level of 62 to 65%. There's a lot of money that is lost that can be used to then provide the services. So why we can't budget is that we have people with a bad culture, and they are not looking or not giving us the direction that will kind of take the country into a good direction. And this is systemic, because when you know, there are those people who just grab a bag and take off, but there are people who are very structured in the system to inflate pricing, right? To, for instance, give tenders and then standard works and so forth, and therein there's a lot of loss of funds that are needed for our services.
Dr. Now let's handle the question of spending within government. Now here's a question where even when the president just took over office, the president said that our coffers are dry. And this has been the same communication throughout. We remember the Prime Cabinet Secretary warning Kenyans that things are difficult, expect this to go for the next 3 years. And the Treasury Cabinet Secretary recently saying that we are finding it hard to even pay salaries. Our accounts are dry. We do not have money. But it is the same government that is always up and about, traveling the world, having a good time, you know. And that brings the question of, if you claim that you don't have money to spend to even pay salaries, how then is it that you are willing to add 50 CASs to pay them salaries? You know, someone else says, you know, if we hire 50 CASs, we are able to get the taxes, but taxes is just for something percentage of the entire 600 of 700,000 that a CAS would get. Are our priorities right when it comes to spending the monies that Kenyans have contributed to the national kitty?
Our priorities are not right, because you have already stated whatever I will have said, you've actually said. so let me just emphasize on one thing. If you are straight, you're earning a salary, you are employed, you're earning a salary, you have a budget for your monthly expenses, you decide every month I will overspend by 50%. And then I will take a debt from a friend to actually cover the deficit that you have. And you do that over a period of 60 years. Will you be able to catch up with that debt? Because you are increasing it by 50% every month. So that's what has been happening. So every year we have a budget, 3 point something trillion, of which we can only fund about 2 trillion. The rest is, we are hoping that we're going to actually borrow it. Then what we do, at the middle of the year, we come up with a new idea. Okay, things have changed. Let's come up with what? What do they say? This change of the budget that they do?
Supplementary.
Yes, supplementary budget. You understand? So that's they actually cut all the projects that they have planned in the start of the financial year. At the middle of the year, they actually remove all those projects. Why do you do that? Why don't you initially, at the start of your financial year, budget according to your means? Secondly, you cannot have a bloated government at every level. 47 county governments, they are bloated. County governments that need only about 1,000 people, have 4,500, 5,000 employees. They can't pay. You understand? The central government is even worse. The government cannot be the sole employer or the premium employer for all Kenyans. The government is supposed to provide, an environment that's conducive to business that will provide employment. So what has happened is now everybody and his cousin is working for the government. So how are we going to fund it? You're saying 50 CSS. 50 CSS have staff. You think 50 CSS is just the 50. Each of them have, let's say, 3 to 4 staff. So you're actually looking at 250, senior civil servants. So I think it's not sustainable. The fact is, you also have to look at it this way. The debt that he was talking about, 40% is local debt, meaning money that was borrowed from our own market, our own businesses. So the government is competing with me as a business person in the market, and the government, never defaults on its debt. So government can borrow better than any business. So that's called crowding out. What's happening is businesses cannot get financing because the government is taking all the money. So this, whatever we're doing does not make sense to an ordinary person. It only makes sense to, I think, the civil service and the public servants. Yeah.
Leonard and Dr. Let's take a short commercial break. When we come back, we talk about the devolved units. Is it devolved corruption? What do we need to do to fix that? And also, we just look at solutions that the government should put in place for us to be able to look at services being provided to us, for us to finally say the government is finally prudently spending our taxes and our monies. I'll see you in a bit. Don't go anywhere.